is Phil.
So it is 2 o'clock. I suppose we can get started. So this meeting is going to be a little bit different than some of our previous office hours with Dave and Anita, and that we aren't going to have a presentation up front. We're just going to, we have some questions that have previously been sent, and David Block and myself will rotate back and forth in asking questions. And also, if people have questions they want Anita to answer in real time, you can type it in the chat. You can unmute yourself and just ask the question, raise your hand via Zoom with the little blue hand. Or you can type it in the chat either to everyone or just to myself or to Dave, and then we can ask your question.
So I think while we're waiting for people to get on the line, I'd just like to say, so I'm Dave Block. I'm chair of the Department of Viticulture and Enology and one of the hosts of Office Hours with Dave and Anita. I'd like to thank, first of all, a big thank you to Anita for, she's been working pretty much around the clock between harvest, her research on smoke, research on other things, and answering questions. We just figured it would be much faster to maybe answer questions this way than for her to have to be sitting there for 5 or 6 hours a day answering them individually. So that's why we're doing this today. I'd like to thank Karen Block, our Director of Industry Relations, and Caroline Furman for organizing this event like they always do. They always organize the office hours events, and for Karen to co-hosting today. I have to say there's, Anita is going to be answering questions. I'd also like to thank all the other people who have supplied information along the way. It's kind of new territory. There's not a lot that's known definitively. So I'm sure Anita's going to tell you when she's sure of things and tell you when it's her best guess, and share the knowledge that we've gathered from not only within Davis, but throughout other academic institutions in Oregon, Washington, and basically around the state. Many of you will remember that we did have an office hours, I think back in June, focused on smoke exposure. And we did have Tom Collins from Washington State and Elizabeth Tomasino from Oregon State on that call as well. So I think with that, maybe as Karen said, we're going to alternate between questions that we've already received and ones from you. And so maybe I'll have Karen start with the first question.
All right, I just want to mention that again, if anybody wants to ask a question in real time, it looks like, all right, we just got one, that we can go back and forth between the questions that we've received previously and some of the ones that we're going to receive right now as we speak. All right, so the first question that I have is for Anita is, there's an Italian company, Puro Vino, that claims that several hours of ozone contact with grapes will remove all traces of smoke taint. That got me thinking that maybe an ozone rinse at the winery might be beneficial as well. What are your thoughts on this?
So the problem is we have no data on ozone. There's one Italian professor that started to look at ozone. The last time I talked to him, he still didn't have any definitive results about any impact on volatile phenols, and those are the marker compounds that causes smoke taint. So it's a real big unknown. And the problem is, obviously the volatile phenols are not on top of the skins, it's actually inside. So it's possible that the ozone can go inside the grape, but then it will lack specificity like everything else. And it could also break down all your other compounds that's there. And this including terpenes and everything else. So I just don't know. We have absolutely no data on what ozone would do if you treat your grapes with ozone. I know there's some people that have tried it during the previous fire seasons, and then the data I saw was very inconclusive, and I didn't follow up, so I didn't see those wines later on, and I just saw initial data, and it didn't really show much at that point in time. So I'm just not sure.
So this is a question in the chat. I think I know I've gotten quite a few times. I understand removing ash from grapes may be beneficial, though there's a question about how best to do that. Is there any risk that using water could create a burning lye if the ash quantity is high enough? And I'll add to that question, you know, what are the issues related to mold and berry cracking and all kinds of things?
Yeah, so obviously it's, why we're saying now, previous years we said, don't worry about the ash. Why we're saying now something about the ash is because of anecdotal evidence that I received from several winemakers that removed ash and thought it made a real difference. And we collected ash from the vineyard here and analyzed the ash, and the ash was actually releasing volatile phenols. So, and it was able to release volatile phenols for up to a week. No, so that makes me more concerned about ash. So this is why now I'm thinking perhaps it could be beneficial to remove the ash. The problem, okay, so you'll have to really look. We've done washing here on a few varieties, and I don't definitely think it removed it. But you know, for Cab, we haven't had any problems. Our grapes weren't too dehydrated. We tested it on a few vines. I haven't seen a negative. The clusters are pretty loose, so you can see it actually washing off. It's not like the water is, and we're blowing it dry as well. I have to tell you this. So the canopy is quite open, so it's not like it makes a humid, moist environment in there. So that is something to consider. I've had questions about really tight clusters and a concern of actually pushing the ash into the cluster instead of actually removing it. And there is a question of, can you wash it in a way that you just rinse the outside? You're not actually pushing it in. So you're gonna have to like test and see. There's not gonna be a one-fits-all solution for this. What we've tried out here seemed to work pretty well. We've collected some of the water that came off the bunches. It contains lots of dust and ash. I don't know how much is ash and how much is dust, unfortunately. And also if your ash is 3-4 weeks old, I don't know if that's gonna make any impact because that ash probably isn't releasing. But we don't know, nobody, I've talked to the Australians as well. None of my colleagues in the US have actually done fermentations with and without ash to see that even if the ash isn't releasing anything, can it release during a fermentation process? And that's what we don't know. So this is why I'm saying, if it's possible and you think your grapes can handle it, to see if you can wash it before processing your grapes in the winery. If you had at any stage ash in your vineyard, not everybody has had ash. It depends on where you are in relation to the vines.
All right, I'll ask one now. I'll ask one from the questions received previously. We know Syrah has high natural levels of guaiacol and 3-methyl-guaiacol. Do any other cultivars have natural levels of these compounds?
So all varieties have natural levels of these compounds. Okay, so all varieties have both free and bound all the marker compounds, all 13 marker compounds. It's just that Syrah stands out because it has extremely high levels naturally. So that makes it very different from the baseline of all the other varieties. So it's in all of them. They all seem to have different levels of taking up volatile phenols from the atmosphere. This stage, there's no relation to thin or thick skin or any other physiological parameter that we can relate to. We don't have enough baseline data to make any conclusions from those things. We know that some varieties can handle volatile phenol amounts, elevated amounts better than others. And many times it's dependent on the wine matrix. Like a Pinot Noir has a more delicate, can I put it that way, wine matrix. So it's much easier for the smoke compounds to stand out. Where if you're making a full-bodied Cabernet Sauvignon, there's a lot of things that can help you hide the smoke, and it's not that apparent.
All right, here's another question from the chat. At what level do bound cresol numbers combined become a concern if there are no other smoke taint precursors present?
Yeah, I've had a few people, and that's quite strange because usually we see more alcohol than cresol numbers. So Guaiacol has a smoky medicinal aroma, and cresols is more like a tar medicinal aroma. The Orton-Para cresols have threshold levels that's 3 times higher than Guaiacol, but Meta cresol is the same as Guaiacol. But we know that these threshold values doesn't mean a lot, because when they're combined, they have a synergistic impact on each other and can actually display differently in the wine than what they look like if you evaluate them sensorially on their own. This may be due to the composition of the smoke. I know that depending on what burns, you can have different concentration of marker compounds, because this is the first year that we are seeing pretty high cresol levels, but not that high Guaiacol levels. And I don't really know what that means, unfortunately. We don't really have a baseline. I would say you want your cresol levels, your combined cresol levels, to be around the same that you're thinking of Guaiacol. If it's like double that amount, you should perhaps start being concerned. But like I said, this is just an opinion. We just don't have data on these compounds. But if it becomes the combined is double what they say is a concern for Guaiacol, that is a potential risk.
So Anita, just to follow up on that, I think this is a good time to think about the analyses that people can get. So that was a question of bound cresol, and I wonder if you could discuss, I think there's basically 3 assays that are being talked about right now. The one assay that just measures Guaiacol and 4-methyl Guaiacol, one that measures a wider version but all free, and then another assay that can also measure bound. I wonder if you can talk about the differences between those 3 assays.
Okay, so, the one assay is just free Guaiacol and 4-methyl Guaiacol, right? That's the standard assay that we've always had. So that just gives you 2 of the 13 marker compounds. Other assays give you the whole of 7 free volatile phenols. Okay, so that's 7 of the potential 13. And then you can get the bound, which is 6 main compounds that's bound. Now, some labs do acid hydrolysis, and they give you an idea of what gets released through acid hydrolysis. So they measure the free after hydrolysis and tells you that's an estimate of what was bound. And then you get labs that actually analyze the bound itself. Now, I would say the most informative is if you get all 13 marker compounds, the 7 free and the 6 bound. Second most informative is if you have the 7 free and you get the acid hydrolysis of the bound. Third most informative is if you only get the 7 free. Fourth most informative is if you only get Guaiacol or 4-methyl Guaiacol. So obviously, the more information you have, if you have all 13 marker compounds in their natural form in grapes and wine, that gives you the most pieces of the puzzle to try and predict smoke impact. And even then, basically what we're recommending, and this is based on what the Australians have told me over and over again, even then in the low to medium range, there's a gray zone that they don't know, is this elevated or is this within the range of baseline for that variety and the vineyard that it's coming from? We don't always know. And it's for those gray areas that we're recommending doing microfermentations and also evaluating it sensorially, because then you have another data point to look at your data and make more informed decisions. But, you know, none of this is 100% predictive.
And just so everybody's clear, for those of you who are just starting to think about this year, when Anita says bound, she means basically non-volatile, because it's attached to a sugar molecule that can be cleaved later on to form a volatile, smoky material.
And actually, to add on to that, there was a question that came in previously that said a few microferments we did early on were below threshold for Guaiacol, but elevated for P cresol and O cresol. Can you touch on these compounds and their contribution to aroma / mouthfeel?
So because para and orthocresol, normally if you evaluate them on their own, their threshold levels are 3 times that of Guaiacol. But that is when you're only looking at them in isolation. I have no idea what they do when they have synergistic impacts. The one I would be the most concerned about is metacresol, because that one is more at the level of alcohol. So slightly elevated is not that much of a concern, but it depends on how much elevated. And like I said, the problem is in most wines that smoke impacted, the levels of all these compounds are below the threshold levels because they all have a synergistic impact on each other and they impact how they're expressed. So if you look at threshold levels, I would say I'm not that concerned about ortho and paracresol. But I don't know what they can do to everything else that is now perhaps under not even a noticeable level, but it could push them up and become sensorially observable. It is possible, unfortunately.
So there's a question in the chat about, we talked about potentially washing the grapes with water, but, and this is something I was thinking about too. How about using a dry air blast sprayer to remove some ash?
So we tried the air blast on its own, and we weren't convinced that it was removing as much as the water. It seems like the ash is really sticking. So the easiest way to see that was on the leaves, because it's really hard, especially on the red grapes, to see any kind of ash sometimes. So we looked on the leaves and we couldn't see a significant amount blasting off. I mean, you can try it. I just found that it looked like water worked better. That said, I wouldn't add anything to the water. People ask me about adding surfactants and other things to make it stick better to the grapes. You don't want it to stick. You just want it to run off. We're a little bit concerned about the potential impact of surfactants, as some things shown that it actually made absorbance of volatile phenols worse when they use some barriers and other sprays during a smoke event. And we're concerned that it may be due to some surfactants.
Right. There's a question here about having a better understanding of AQI levels and potential for smoke taint prevalence for the vineyards that were not in the direct line of the fire. This person mentioned that the AQI was bad for nearly a month on the entire North Coast. For example, the Mendocino coast had smoke for a couple days without direct smoke/ash penetration, however, had AQI in the 150 to 200 range. And they said as ETS was backed up, they had to make a decision on with their gut. Anyway, they want to know, it'd be nice to know long-term following the vintage and see what's happening with the wines, if there's an analysis that's been done with anything having to do with AQI and relating that to what's seen as far as maybe, I guess, some of the levels of those compounds and therefore smoke taint in the grapes.
Yes, yeah, so AQI levels are focused on 2.5, the size 2.5 size matter. And we find that it actually smoke impact or smoke exposure risk does not relate well to that number. It seems to relate better to the larger, to the one, or to the smaller, to the one. And even then, we said in general, if fresh smoke, and when I say fresh smoke, we're thinking around 24 hours, then there's a better relation between air quality, meaning how dense the smoke is, and your smoke exposure risk. But the older that smoke gets, the less correlation there is between the two. Because what you're seeing is particulate matter, and that's what the air quality is measuring is particulate matter. That is things like carbon. A lot of it is just carbon. Now, carbon is very stable. Volatile phenols that causes smoke impact, you can't see it with the naked eye, right? It's really small. It can attach itself to ash, but we know it breaks down. It's not as stable as carbon. So the older that ash gets, the less it's associated with volatile phenols. And this is why there's not a good correlation between air quality and smoke impact risk.
Yeah. There's a follow-up. There's kind of a follow-up to that and another question that someone asked, and that was, so this is why while you're still on this topic, Anita, someone had asked if you would define like fresh smoke, and you just mentioned something about if it's less than 24 hours.
Yeah.
And this other person was saying they also thought it could be like a proximity to the fire itself. And maybe it's a length of exposure.
Yeah. Well, just because what we found is it depends on wind direction. So we've had vineyards close to a fire being much less impacted than one that is many miles away because of wind direction. And even then, It all depends on, so this is more into atmospheric sciences, which is really not my forte,
Right.
but basically it's to do with not just air currents, so wind movement, it's also to do with air pressure, it's to do with the temperature of the fire itself. All of that influences the plume and the smoke that you see and how it moves. So it's a thick column of smoke that moves directly to you. That's your highest risk. The more dilute that smoke gets and the quicker it moves, then your risk becomes lower and lower.
And I think, this is it's really complicated, but, I think everybody here would agree that if there were a way of predicting the risk in your vineyard by, where the fire is and how hot it's burning and the prevailing winds and stuff, it would be incredibly useful tool if you had a couple days to prepare. So I think this is a conversation that I've started having with others on campus who do modeling, atmospheric modeling. I know Anita's had these conversations as well. Some use of some artificial intelligence to build models and things like that. So obviously it's not going to help this year, but I think it'd probably be a good area of research for coming years.
So it is going to be a big focus of a grant that myself, Tom Collins from Washington State University, and Elizabeth Tomasino from Oregon State University is writing at the moment. Is going to be to try and link atmospheric data to actual data on the ground. So that's why we've been asking people to send us, keep us grape and microfermentation or wine samples with like geographical data, because we need the data on the ground to link with atmospheric data. So, and we hope to get money by the end of the year to do that.
Okay, there's a question in the chat. Knowing testing results may not be available yet, do we have any idea how widespread the impact has been in California, Oregon, Washington, and if there are any zones popping out as likely more or less impacted than others?
It's basically impossible to say. I mean, I would say I assume, and I think, and I'm pretty sure it's probably going to end up being true, that the impact is greater than we've seen in the last 5 years. Just because of the timing of the fires, much earlier, much less fruit have been picked. We've now had 2 smoke events, that all increases the risk. And if you look at the fire maps, and I've talked to people in Oregon and Washington, it's pretty bad up there too. So yes, I think we're going to see a much higher impact than previous years. However, it's almost impossible to predict who will and will not be impacted. We will determine that perhaps next year. And I don't even know if we're going to know then. Like I said, the problem is also, I've known some people have sent me numbers. I'm concerned with making any kind of prediction based on numbers, because I know making decisions based on 2 of 13 marker compounds is risky. This is why we're asking people to do microferments. At least during a microferment, some of the bound can get released, not all, some, and that will make for a better number. And that's why we're also saying tasting, because the problem is there could be a lot in the bound form that you're not seeing. We're very concerned because the fires were now earlier, that the grapes had longer time to glycosylate all these free volatile phenols, and that more than what we used to see in the past may be in the bound form. We don't know for sure, but we're concerned about that. This is why we're really pushing sensory. I know it's, for grape growers, this is a very uncomfortable and unfamiliar terrain to be in, to have to make decisions based on tasting. But why we're doing that is because if you're sensitive to smoke taint, that means that you have bacterial enzymes in your saliva that can hydrolyze the bound. So you're like your own LCMS. You can actually, or acid hydrolysis assay. If you put that wine in your mouth, it hydrolyzes some of it, and you can taste the ashiness in the back of your throat. You're almost more sensitive than the GCNS. So people need to, if people are trained to do good and evaluate wines well, that is very useful data. Don't discount that.
I have a couple of questions related to process of making concentrate. So will the process of making concentrate from smoke tainted or ash covered fruit remove smoke taint? That's the first question. And if the concentrate is smoke tainted and I add that to my finished wine, will the wine become smoke tainted?
So, okay, so the process of making concentrate is a little bit like flash to tunt on steroids. So you're concentrating the juice under reduced pressure. So will you lose some of the free volatile phenols? Yes. But I don't think, it's not like I've tested it, but just based on the science, I don't think you're going to lose much of the bound. So that is my concern. So you can have now a concentrated amount of bound volatile phenols. And when you add that to your wine, it's going to create a new equilibrium in your wine,
right,
making some free and some bound. And yes, you could potentially make a smoke impacted wine. It's a little bit like dilution when people want to potentially dilute a good wine with a little bit of wine that is impacted. But always you have to make very sure what is in your wine. Do bench trials before you do that, because you can just make a lot of smoke impacted wines. I mean, dilution is a possibility to use, but you need to do bench trials and give it plenty of time and do analysis on those wines to make sure that you give it enough time for any potential bound to get a new equilibrium in the new wine.
So, Anita, is smoke taint more prominent in machine harvested grapes versus hand harvested grapes? And if so, why? Specifically, if you could comment on Chardonnay.
Okay, so now for white grapes, machine harvesting does have an impact because these compounds are basically in the skins. When they're in the pulp is only when researchers basically put it in a burning fire. Okay, that's excessive. Mostly it's in the skins. So now for a white grape, even if there's some smoke impact, if you do very little skin contact, very quick pressing, under mild pressure, then you could potentially still have a juice that doesn't have much of the mocha compounds and make a decent wine. However, during machine harvesting, we know that you get more damage of the skin. It travels to your winery. So it has more skin contact time and the potential to extract those volatile phenols from the skin. And so, yes, that is just an additional risk.
Someone did ask that there have been a lot of numbers thrown around for likelihood of smoke taint based on guaiacol levels in grapes and bucket fermentations. And they were asking a specific question. So I don't know, like you were saying, you may not want to give specific numbers, but what levels does the literature and your research support for white grapes versus red grapes versus white wine and red wine?
Okay, so we just don't have enough data.
Right.
I mean, I've talked to the Australians that have way more data than I have, and they basically don't want to give me a number. Nobody wants to be responsible for giving a number. I can tell you what I've seen in Cab. The alcohol numbers in Cabernet Sauvignon that's not impacted by smoke. And I've seen up to 2 micrograms per liter of alcohol. And so up to 2 for the limited amount of wines I've seen. I'm putting my head here on a block. I've seen 2, okay? So above 2 potentially, and look, some wines may have lower than that and also still being impacted because remember, guaiacol is 1 of 13 markers. So even those 13 markers doesn't always accurately predict smoke impact. So take this with a big pinch of salt. And so for whites, around 1. But like I said, it varies so much. It depends on your wine style. It depends on many things. Like what we found that, like I just said, some people have, most people, so there's about 20 to 25% of people that seems to can't really taste smoke taint or isn't very sensitive to smoke taint. And we think it's because they don't have these enzymes in their saliva that can hydrolyze the bound. But also that hydrolysis process in your saliva is impacted. The higher the alcohol, the less it hydrolyzes. The lower the pH, the less it hydrolyzes. The higher the sugar, the less it hydrolyzes. So this is when why when there's a very, very little smoke impact and you just a slight effect on the throat, if you have a little bit of residual sugar, a little bit higher alcohol, low acid, you can't see it. So this is the thing. I've tasted wines that all have the same level of 13 marker compounds, and they all express those volatile phenols differently due to the huge impact of your wine matrix. Okay. The amount of phenolics will also suppress it. Any green character enhances it. Fruitiness suppresses it. It is a very, very complex issue. This is why we don't have all the answers. But so just keep that in mind. So even one day, hopefully, we have baseline data for all the areas in California, for all the main varieties, and you can at least see where your number fits on baseline. And that will make the gray area a little bit smaller, but it's still not going to be perfect because there's always going to be that matrix unknown effect as well.
All right, this is a question from the chat. What are the most useful tests a winery can offer growers for them to have crop insurance support after harvest and winemaking revealed field damaged grapes?
So what we're suggesting now, because at this point in time, crop insurance only need those two numbers, guaiacol and 4-methyl guaiacol. So what we're recommending is that, and they need it per variety, per block. So we're recommending that they get those two numbers, even if they get it a month from now, because they need it for crop insurance. Then you make a bucket fermentation, or even if you make large scale wine, so long it reflects only that block, because they need to show chain of custody. Then the crop insurance, if they take then that micro fermentation or wine, and also send that away for testing to get a guaiacol and 4-methyl guaiacol number. And they have good sensory evaluation, right? And what we're talking about good sensory evaluation is 3 to 5 people, not just the people that's directly impacted and maybe seen as subjective. It would be good if you have like a third-party person there. We like the idea that you have control. So have a smoke impact wine if you can find one, and have a wine that isn't impacted at all. It doesn't have to be exactly the same as the wines you're evaluating. The only idea with that is, because there's people that can't see smoke taint, you want to make sure that the people you're getting to taste your wines can actually taste it properly. The control for non-smoke is because there's a lot of carryover. And we're telling people to wait 2 minutes between each wine. So this is not a fast tasting. Rinse your mouth with water and wait 2 minutes, because otherwise you get carryover. So that control is to make sure that you don't have carryover. And you also get people now that see smoke everywhere. So it's also for those that are overly sensitive, okay? So these are your two controls. Do really good notes on the nose and in the palate. And that whole packet, the number on the grapes, the number in the wine, and your sensory. Crop insurance seems to, that's going to depend on the specific agent, but they said if you can show chain of custody, they will evaluate all the relevant information. Okay. So the more you have, you know, and if you are doing testing and you get other numbers as well, that helps you and it's more informative for you and perhaps for potentially other legal issues that hopefully none of us will have. But crop insurance for now is only looking at guaiacol and 4-methyl guaiacol. We're also suggesting freeze grapes, freeze wine, just little bits, just freeze them for in case you have to go back to them. If there's a dispute or sample gets lost or whatever else, or the testing gets adjusted and suddenly crop insurance say we will look at 7 compounds, that you actually have some sample that you can go back to. These things are very stable in a freezer, okay? Normal freezer is good enough. In a plastic bag or a plastic container.
All right, there's one about, could you comment on the efficiency of activated charcoal on smoke taint? And they're asking also about dose and mode of application.
Okay, so the Australians, I've tested activated charcoal. The Australians did a really great study. There's a technical review. We have a link to that on our website, don't we, Karen?
Say that again. I was looking.
The
sorry.
technical review that the Australian.
Yes.
They
It's
don't
in the
pronounce
it's
it
in the
technical.
FAQ. It's in the
Yeah.
FAQ.
Okay, so they did a technical review where they looked at a large quantity of activated charcoals. Now, some of them are sold under different names here in the US or isn't available in the US, but there's plenty that works well that is available here. Okay, so because not all activated charcoal is equal, unfortunately. Okay, some work better than others and they don't really know why. So some worked better in juice, some worked better in wine. So for white grapes, I'm testing it now in the winery, so I can't tell you. But my feeling is if you know that those grapes are potentially impacted, to rather find it on the juice level, it will strip it, unfortunately, obviously. But I feel then you have more tools to make up for that. Things you can do to add body back, add flavor back, than when you have to do it at the end step. But this is obviously if you're pretty sure that there may be an impact. They did up to 2 grams per liter, but at 2 grams per liter, you're really stripping your wine. I've tried up to 1 gram per liter or 1 gram per kilogram and found that it does reduce it quite a bit. Now, it removes a lot of the free, it only removes a small amount of the bound, unfortunately. So it helps at low levels, but if you have a massive impact, it's just not going to solve the problem. It's also something that you may want to do with your press wines. Keep your press cut separate and treat that more heavily and look what it looks like. On the wine level, the max I will go is 1 gram per liter. And like I said, you may want to start with 0.5 and see what impact that has. And this is why we're saying, if you think your wine is impacted, try and make as phenolic rich and color rich red wine you can. Because firstly, all that color and phenolic subdues any smoke impact. And then if you have to treat it, then that impact is less. Because obviously the activated charcoal takes some of the phenolics out and it takes some of the color out.
And when you're saying, giving these numbers, Anita, I think you would recommend to everybody that they try this on a very small scale, 750 milliliter scale first. Don't do it to your whole batch.
No, it's like you would do any kind of fining, right? You first do it on bench scale, evaluate the impact before you make a decision.
Yeah. So this is a question about Pinot Noir and the length of fermentation for Pinot Noir. There have been conflicting ideas about contact with skins and the temperature of fermentations, pH and things like that. I'm kind of paraphrasing. And this is for vineyard in Oregon, about 60 miles from Mount Hood, where they had some smoke exposure for a couple days, and now the air is clearing up.
Okay. So I see volatile phenols at this stage very much like color compounds, right? So volatile phenols are mostly, a lot of it's glycosylated, like your color is anthocyanin and glycosides. So basically, if you see your color coming out, you're pretty sure your volatile phenols are coming out. Okay, so that is like, so when you have your color, you pretty much have all your volatile phenols as well. And because I get a lot of people saying, oh, you know, people suggesting that I add pectolytic enzymes and I crank up the temperature to try and get my color out as quickly as possible, and then I can press after 3 days. Well, everything you're doing to get that color out is getting all your volatile phenols out as well. So you will be pretty much where you would have been if you just did 7 days of skin contact. So there's only one study that looked at skin contact and how it extracts. And basically 1 day after day 1, this was in Merlot, they had 30%, 3 days they had 50%, 5 days they had more than 80% of all volatile phenols in the grapes. So that gives you an idea. This was a 25-degree fermentation, but research scale. That's the best reference I have for you, but that's just on one lot of grapes. But basically, anything that gets color out is getting volatile phenols out as well. So just keep that in mind when you think about things that you can try in the winery.
I have another question here. Any suggestions for establishing a baseline of smoke impact for sensory evaluations? So probably this is someone thinking about the microferments and things. How can winemakers benchmark the sensory evaluations, oh, there you go, of small scale ferments?
Yeah, so, okay, I can't wait for in-person workshops because I want to do like sensory training forever. Basically, what we want to do is, I would say, get all your, and this is what the Australians are doing, and I think it's a good idea, just to simplify it. They're following the rules of having 2 controls, waiting 2 minutes between your wines, but then they have a rating, a 0 to 9, and you can make it whatever your rating, but standardize it. They're doing a 0 to 9 rating on the nose. So all aromas that can be related to smoke. So this is smoke, ash, tar, charcoal, barbecue, bacon, cloves, you know, whatever you think. Adding that all together as a rating. This is why it's good if you have a high impact wine with you, because that is an anchor. You can use that as, okay, this is what I see as a 9, and rate everything relevant to that. So that would be good if we had like a standard that we could give for everybody so that everybody's anchor is similar, but we don't have it this year, but that would be a good idea. And the same on the ashtray character in the mouth, have also rating 0 to 9 in the mouth, and use your impacted control as your anchor to get everybody sort of on the same level, because it's true. People rate smoke impact very differently. Even those that are sensitive to it, some are overly sensitive and some are medium. I see it a little bit like bitterness, where a third doesn't see it, another third thinks it's okay, and another third is dying because it's so bitter.
So, and I would say, like Anita is saying, in addition to, it'd be nice to have a high level standard. Like Anita said previously, make sure you have that unaffected standard on the other end so you can bracket.
Yeah. So your unaffected is your 0, and your high impact is your 9 or 5, whatever rating you use. Use that as your 2 anchors so that you can sort of calibrate people.
So there's a question here on the use of enzymes. So would it make sense to use glucosidase and or glycosidase enzymes pre-primary to cleave bonds and volatilize smoke taint early so it can potentially blow off during primary? Or is it better to avoid enzymes altogether, inoculate with enzyme negative yeast and mallow strains? Do these strains exist, and are they available on the market?
Okay, so you have a lot of sugars, and enzymes are totally inhibited by all that sugar. So in the juice stage, they don't work very well. On the wine stage, I know I've tested 5 enzymes. The Australians have tested way more. I think they said 15 on wines, and none of the commercial available enzymes at this stage works particularly well. They found a couple that hydrolyzed, it's in the serengol bound compounds, but not anything else. So they're not making any recommendation regarding enzyme use because it's been very inconsistent and didn't have a huge impact. The 5 I looked at didn't have a huge impact either, even after 6 weeks of treatment. As far as yeast goes, I've tried different yeasts, and I know this, the Australians have tried different yeasts, and some do result in more free than bound than others, but we haven't been able to really relate that to the ability to hydrolyze bound or having specifically that activity. I don't know if anything like that exists on the market that really focuses on that. Dave, are you aware of anything?
No.
I don't think so. And, you know, and I'm talking about the bacterial enzyme in the saliva. I think somebody asked me, so why don't we use that and just break everything in the fray? Problem is, that is hypothesis. We don't even know what that enzyme looked like or what it's called. So yes, that's work that we still need to do. So no, that's definitely not commercially available.
All right, there's one here about someone is wondering about their barrels. And so they're saying, I've been looking for information on how aging wine in barrel, both white and red, may affect future use of the same barrels if there are detectable levels of guaiacol in the wine this year. Is there any research to suggest the barrels may be permanently contaminated? Is there a threshold for this? And perhaps is there any kind of specific cleaning program that could mitigate the risk?
So, the standard cleaning and sanitation of barrels, I would have thought would be, if you look at it like a chemist, be more than good enough to remove all potential compounds. However, I've some anecdotal evidence from winemakers that tells me they think their barrels impacted their wines. There's no research on this, like nothing. I have plenty of wine that I think will end up being smoke impacted, coming from somewhere. And I will put that in barrels and see. But unfortunately, I just don't know. It may be beneficial to clean them, put water or something in the barrels and just taste that. The problem here is you're going to get free, because the free volatile phenols you're getting from oak. It's the bound that you want to be concerned about. According to me, you should be able to clean them out. They shouldn't be there the next year. But now I have these winemakers that tell me they really think it had an impact and that there was a carryover in their barrels. And there's no researcher that's actually looked at it per se. So now I'm really worried about telling people that it will be okay and then it's not okay. So I'm going to go with, I don't know. Try water, taste the water. There shouldn't be any bound. So if you send that away, this is the problem. ETS can do analysis on bound, but they're not doing it now because it's laborious, it takes very long, and they have a backlog that's forever. But when it's not that hectic, the bound analysis of, say, water in that barrel will give you an idea if there's any carryover from the previous year, because there should be no bound. There should only be free if you only put water in a barrel. Does that make sense?
Okay, so you were mentioning enzymes before. I'll just add, I did have an email a week or so ago that asked about, there were people who anecdotally found that they seem to have a lot more smoke characteristics after malolactic fermentation. And I know I corresponded with Dave Mills, who's our expert on lactic acid bacteria. And he said, of course, those bacteria do actually have glycosidases. Whether they can actually cleave specifically the molecules we're seeing or not, he wasn't sure, but that could happen in malolactic.
Yeah, so we're not sure whether it's malolactic or is it just the duration of time.
Yep.
Because wine have a low pH, right? Anything between under 4 is seen as low. So we know these bound over time hydrolyze. So research haven't really determined, is it due to malolactic bacteria, or is it really just the natural progression of time? I don't know.
And so here's a question from the chat. Do you know if we're tasting smoke character on a microferment of Sauvignon Blanc that's been fermented on skins, does this mean for sure that those characters will be in the wine if the wine's not fermented on the skins? Is there a chance it'll be less in the finished wine not fermented on the skins?
Yes, definitely. So look, when you do microfermentations with the skins, that is like really worst case scenario. Because that is like, okay, so if I'm going to make my white wine like a red wine, there's obviously risk. So it depends. I would evaluate those wines very differently to what I would evaluate a red wine. That just tells you, okay, there are elevated levels in my skins of volatile phenols due to some kind of smoke exposure. That means I need to be careful when I make these wines, and I want to limit my skin contact, keep my press wines separate. But think about, so if those wines were just mildly impacted, I personally think it probably can still make a pretty good wine. You just need to be careful. But this is very subjective, obviously now. But if it's really bad, perhaps not. It's really, you're going to have to evaluate, because that's worst case scenario. That's just telling you, beware. There may be a problem if you have a lot of skin contact. So with light skin contact, you would get like 10 to 20% of what you're tasting now in that microferment.
Someone is asking, what's the best way to prepare a sample of juice must or wine for sensory analysis? And then other questions they were asking in association with that is about lowering the pH, heating for a period of time, adding some sort of enzyme.
Is this not for analysis and tasting? This is not for the
sensory.
Sensory. So we're looking at ways to increase. So this is something I'm looking at this year. At this stage, I've talked to the Australians about this as well. They just have the standard microfermentation protocol that's on their website, and which we adapted a little for just American units and things. We're looking at, can we use high temperature? Can we add alcohol? Can we just use quicker fermentations to heat, speed up the process, get the potential volatile phenols out without having to do a 5-day fermentation and evaluating them? But at this stage, I don't know how relatable that is to the 5-day protocol. I'm not sure. And that's the problem. We're testing it this year, but I just don't know.
So Anita, we have a little less than 10 minutes, and we have at least 5 or 6 more questions so far. So just to give you an idea of pacing.
He's telling me to be shorter.
Yes, but in a nice way. So the next question in chat is, did you say that low pH makes the smoke sensory characteristics less noticeable?
Yes. Yes. And this is mainly because at the low pH, the enzymes in your saliva is not as good at hydrolyzing that bound to the free. It's a tasting effect. Yeah. It's not like the low pH does really anything else. It's just sensorily, it has an impact.
There's someone who asked, is there any experience using a backpack blower ahead of the pickers to remove the ash?
So we've been using the backpack blower to dry the water after we rinse the water. So
after you rinse the ash, you're saying, so you rinse the ash off with water and then use the backpack blower?
Yes, so we've just been using it to dry it because, I'm making research wines. I don't want one have a little bit more water than the other one. That works pretty well, the blower to dry it. You can try it. I mean, we tried a little bit and I wasn't sure if I could see it removing ash or not. I mean, if it's really heavy and lying thick on the ash, berries, absolutely. But our ash was weeks ago. We didn't get a new lot with this extra fire that started. So I couldn't visually see that it's doing anything.
Is there a sampling protocol you might suggest for freezing grapes and wine as per your earlier comment, for crop insurance or for other purposes?
So we're saying that you want to do like a representative sample. So if you're doing it for a block, for microfermentations, we say 30 to 40 clusters, 1 per vine spread around your block and making a microfermentation from that. And then you want to basically, we don't need much, but if you do like a 375 ml bottle, but you can do even less. But 375 ml bottle or 250 milliliter bottle, if you just in plastic tubes, you can do it, or you can put it in a glass bottle. Just be aware of volume when you freeze. For berries, we only need around 200 berries, but it's better for a representative sample. If you do like half a pound to a pound in a gallon bag and freeze that, but some people don't have enough space. So the minimum is 200 berries, but the more representative is. The minimum round of wine is 50 milliliters, but if you can give me more, then we can go back if something goes wrong and we can do more tests.
Someone did ask, and I think you would know the answer to this. Has anyone at the Oakville station or other UC, or where there are located other UC Davis sensors, been monitoring smoke and done any correlation or done any airborne measurements and then correlated with smoke or taint in grapes?
No, so we have a sensor here on campus. So I've been looking at the air quality and been noting it. And I will see if it relates to any of the measurements we took in the vineyard here. And there's a sensor close to Oakville as well. So we will do the same thing there. But like I said, at this stage, we haven't seen good correlations between the two, but we're going to try and see with atmospheric scientists if we can find a correlation.
So there's a question in the chat. Are there any barriers that can be sprayed before the fire event that might lower concentrations of volatile compounds? Some sprays can make the problem worse, while others appear to prevent, reduce the volatile phenols penetration into the berry. Is there something coming down the road that we can try?
So we're looking at several barrier sprays at the moment. The Australians have looked at a lot. The things that publish, you will see there's a variable impact on different varieties. The Australians say it's because of rate of application, and because in the vineyard, you really only get 30 to 40% coverage of your berries. And then the Canadians found some good impact with Parka. But I know they retested it again, and then they didn't find as good results. So that is an open question. What I can tell you is that something like Parka seems to, there's some positive results associated with that, but only if it was sprayed long in advance of the smoke. At this stage, it seems that while you have smoke, anything that you put on the grape seems to just be an extra surface area for the volatile phenols to absorb onto. So I would not spray anything while your vineyard is in smoke conditions. At this stage, there's too much data that sort of indicates that that may be problematic. So berry sprays, Parka, one study showed some advantage. I'm looking at it, Tom Collins is looking at it, the Australians are looking at it. So hopefully by next year, if there's something that is helpful, we can tell you in advance.
There's a follow-up question to talking about Oakville Station, wondering if that we're testing fruit from Oakville Station for that smoke impact. If we're looking at what, what's the AQIs and also atmospheric science and that kind of thing.
So, yeah, I mean, the air quality has been bad. It wasn't that bad for the first fires. It's now been I think it was impacted now for the second ones. We have done analysis on the microferments that we did on Oakville, and data shows very little free. I don't have bound numbers. So this is what I can tell you. Oakville, if you look at the free, there is an impact based on that. But this was based on grapes that was harvested when?
About a week and a half ago, maybe?
Like a week and a half ago, yeah. So we will take another sample now because there has been some smoke now in the last week in the Oakville region, and we will do it again. So the microferments we did a week ago didn't show anything by century, and it didn't show anything by free volatile profile for the 7, I do 10 compounds. That didn't show anything. But like I said, that is the free. I'm concerned about that a large quantity could be inbound, and we had more smoke now, so we will go back and reevaluate again. That's all I can say at this point in time.
So there's a question in the chat. We understand that bound compounds can, I think what they're asking is, can they free up over the course of 9 months or maybe more? Is that the outer limit, 9 months, or will you still get things becoming unbound after that?
So the Australian did an interesting thing. They had all these smoke impact studies over many years and many varieties. And they went back to those wines 5 to 6 years after 5 to 6 years of bottle aging. And that control and smoke impacted wines. And both remember, control wines, non-impact by smoke ever, also has free and bound. In the control wines, more of the bound became free. And in the smoke impacted wines, more of the bound became free. The smoke impacted wines, the control wines were still not smoke impacted. The smoke impacted wines became more smoke impacted. They don't know if it's because of the small amount that additionally hydrolyzed, or whether it was due to the fact that your fruity aromas and your body decreases during wine aging and the smoke impact was just standing out more. Basically, unfortunately, it does hydrolyze for the lifetime almost of the wine, depending on how much bound you have. These wines that they studied were pretty heavily impacted, I have to say, so there was a lot of bound. But yes, but most of the time, I think 9 months to a year, I don't know of anybody that had a smoke impacted wine that really showed the smoke impact later than that period of time. I made some wine in 2017, and it took pretty much a good 9 months or more before the smoke impact became apparent. But I don't know of anybody that has only seen it after like 2 years or something. I'm not aware of any. That doesn't mean it's not possible, but I'm not aware of any.
And we did get a question that has to do with doing sensory analysis of the microfermentations to try to predict whether or not they're smoke taint and whether that winemakers could do this sensory in lieu of chemical testing. But I think one of the questions
it's not in lieu of, it's
right.
too.
Yes. And so that's
I don't want anybody to just do sensory, because that's not going to help you for crop insurance. It's probably not going to help you if there's any kind of legal issue down the road. So please, it's additional. Don't replace the testing with the sensory, okay?
I wanted you to reiterate that.
Sensory is a really good tool. That may not help when you're talking to a bunch of lawyers.
So, I mean, related to that, Anita, there's a question that just came in. Can you comment regarding shipping grape samples for analyses overseas to Australia, for example?
So the problem with grape is you probably want to do juice. And then I'm always concerned about it starting to ferment on the way there. You can contact the Australians as well, but what I would do is I would give that grapes as much skin contact as possible before juicing it. And you may want, I don't know, if you have the capability of centrifuging or something like that, that would make it better. You can freeze it and try and send it as a frozen sample. But I'm not 100% sure how quickly. I've sent wine to the AWRI once, and it took me a very long time because it got stuck in customs. I'm always concerned with that. Now, a juice sample won't have the same problems as wine does. There's less issues with that, so it may be faster. The customer service of AWRI is really great. Email them and ask them how's the best way to send them a sample. They have a lot of experience in this.
And I think, anytime you're sending fruit or juice or wine over an international border, just make sure you know what you're doing. That you follow whatever the regulations are for doing that. I know the question probably comes because of limited access to testing here. You can go on ETS's website and look. They have on their homepage a list of alternative testing sites. I will tell you this, and I don't have a lot of information yet. We're actively working with the CDFA. UC Davis is working with CDFA to investigate whether it might be possible for us to quickly come up with some capacity to help out with testing. And we'll keep you posted on that, hopefully over the next few days to a week. I know basically if anything is going to be done and be useful, it has to be done quickly. So we're definitely conscious of that.
So there is a note in the chat that the Super Lab in British Columbia sent out an email yesterday with instructions for sending grapes in a form that's supposed to help it get through customs. Because I guess we had also heard from people that people were having trouble getting things to the lab there in British Columbia, but I guess they now have a form that they send. And like Dave just mentioned that, there are other academic institutions also in the United States, right, that are going to try to come online, but yeah. Someone asked, how high is the smoke taint potential of stems in whole cluster fermentation for reds?
So this is another thing that I'm not sure. So all I can tell you is this. So I am doing like 2 different varieties with clusters, with stems and rachis included, so I can answer this question better next year, or not next year, or 10 years from now when we have this problem. But the Australians, I've asked my Australian colleagues whether they've done any testing, and all they've told me is they did with the fires they had. They made a lot of Pinot Noir wines, like 10 different wine styles. And the worst style was the carbonic one. So, and it had the most smoke. So I'm not sure, but it's potentially true that Rakis can also absorb the volatile phenols. And especially if they're not rock hard and lignified, that could extract. So potentially, to be on the safe side, I would rather just not include it.
So we are at 5 after 3, and I think we've gone through a lot of the questions we got beforehand, and I think most of the questions, I think we've hit all the questions that have been in the chat. I want to take this opportunity to really thank Anita Oberholster for, I guess, being on the hot seat for an hour, answering questions and telling you everything that she knows and a lot of things she doesn't know, she's working on and so forth. Again, I want to thank Karen Block for organizing this this event along with Caroline Furman. Caroline has put in a link to the resources. Some of you may have received them in an email from Karen in the last couple of days, but they're also on our website. And Caroline just put the link in. You can always contact us, contact me or Karen or Anita or Caroline. And again, go to our website, Facebook as well, to get the latest information. Hopefully we'll be able to take the things like the FAQs that we sent out and keep them up to date and expand them as we know more and gather more information.
Yeah, and those, I have like 500 unread emails in my inbox. I'm really sorry. I am working on them, but you may have to be patient for that answer. So I hope if, I am working through my emails, but I don't have a lot of time at the moment.
I think what Anita isn't saying is that she is the only extension enologist in California, and there are about 4,500 wineries, which isn't a good ratio right now when the industry needs help. So give your input to UCANR that we could use at least 2 enologists for 4,500 wineries in the state to help deal with acute issues like this one.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind a clone or 2.
Yep.
Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
If you have more questions, you can email me and I'll try. And if you're the lucky one that is the first 100 I answer that day, you may get a timely answer.
And
You can also email me as well.
FAQ so that others can see them as well.
Yep.
Yes. So, and I will try and update the FAQ as people ask questions that I didn't think of, so that hopefully that can answer a lot of questions. You don't have to wait for me to finally get down to answering emails.
And we will post a link to this recording so you can go back and listen to it as well.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Good luck.
Thank you.